Okay, there's a lot of talk about staking and betting banks and keeping records and all that. I mean, do you use a staking plan as such?
I think staking is the hardest part of gambling, and keeping your discipline is extremely important. I mean, I've always had personally a deposit limit a day, which I won't say how much it is, but whether it's a tenner or £1,000 or £20,000, whatever it is, you've got to have a point where you can't chase and stop yourself from losing too much money, because I think things can go very badly wrong, and there's not a punter in the world who doesn't, you know, if you back something that's 20 lengths clear, it falls at the last, or you get beat a short head at the dogs, then you get beat another short head, and then another short. It's very hard not to feel that sort of heat on the back of your neck. You know, you're sort of hotted up, aren't you? You want to get it back. Right, where's the next race? What's the next? You've got to avoid that at all costs. And I think having a deposit limit, ever since Betfair allowed that, I've always had that. So I've always known that I was only up for a certain amount each day. We start again tomorrow. We crack on from there, you know. And that way you know what the worst case scenario is. When I was younger, I was playing at the dogs far too big, looking back, in the scale of what I had. You know, I thought I was sort of, you know, Jack the Lad and all the rest of it, a big fish in a small pond. And I remember when Betfair started, I was probably flying along at the dogs, you know, had some good punters playing Terry Dart or playing quite big hitters at the dogs. And it was a vibrant market where you could bet your opinion. If you went 12-1 and you knew the owner, you could lay a 2,400 or two. You know, there was money at the races, at the greyhounds. So Betfair came along, I thought, what a game. There's a 12-runner handicap at Catterick. Look, you can lay a 4,000 to 1. How can that be 4 to 1 in a, you know, it'd be 11 to 4 2 minutes later. Steve Goff would be on, Peter Jones would be on it. It'd win by 3 lengths. Oh, I've done 4. You know, you played on the same scale as you did when you were the sort of master at Reading with 125% on the board, thinking you're clever. You went on to Betfair and thought, well, we can do, you know, how can that be 4 to 1 in a big handicap? You know, how can that be 6 to 1 at Ascot? And it was a lesson. You've got to play into things where you have an understanding of what you're dealing with and why things are a certain price. I think a lot of people, and I was certainly one of them, when Betfair came along, I thought it was a honeypot. I thought we're going to be rich, Rodney. You know, it really was like that. It was you can dictate, you can do what you like, but you have to be incredibly disciplined, I think.
Okay, now honing your skills. We're going to go back to the beginning, because you started your career, if I got this right, as a senior trader, but after doing a degree in politics. Now, how does a degree in politics give you the qualifications to be a senior trader?
I went to Reading University. The reason I went to Reading University was I went to Reading Dog Track. If there was a university at Wimbledon, I'd have gone to Wimbledon. But I went to Reading. I did politics because I've always been very interested in politics. Anyone who suffers my Twitter feed regularly, Simon, will know that I've always been interested in politics. I did that. I used to go the same as everybody you do on these series. Usually it's a parent, isn't it? I went racing with my dad. He used to go to Plumpton, to Fontwell, and he went to Wimbledon Greyhounds. So I was very, very interested in that. I remember going to Cheltenham when I was probably about 13, standing next to Chandler in pitch 1, watching him, watching Colin Webster, watching Dudley, watching Johnny Lights. I was absolutely fascinated by the betting market. The same, that's how we all got in it. I used to go to Cheltenham, places like that, and watch the betting market. I didn't really watch the racing. I was more interested in, you know, the tic-tacs and the money flying in, laying the front 6 in the market in the Gold Cup, getting them all beat, and they were, you know, different times, fantastic. And I decided I want to be a bookmaker. So basically I was a punter at the dogs, quite a good punter. If I say, I was probably better in my early 20s than I've ever been since, to be honest, because you're completely dedicated. You haven't got to, Bob. You've got nothing to lose. You really want to get going. So totally dedicated to watching these VHS videos of the greyhounds, rewind, watch 1, watch 2, watch 3, watching them for hours and hours and hours. So it got to the point where you're like a chess player. You know what every piece is capable of doing. You'd look at the races and you'd form a very, very good opinion of what was likely to happen in these races. And even against 135% at Reading Dogs, against some very mean old bookmakers who are then upset by joining their ranks, you could have a very good feel for it. So how did I become a senior trader? Well, I went to SAS, was my first job in the text room, on the phones, taking prices, £6,000 a year. salary, which shows how old I am. And that was brilliant fun, met lots of lovely people, still friends with most of them now. Some of them have gone on to do very well, like Tony Ennis, Steve Freeth, Richard Russell at the BHA, Stuart Middleton. I'm missing loads of people, but there were loads of clever people there. And after that, I left that, went to work for Sporting Index. Day one at Sporting Index, I sat next to Alistair Hunter. David Garbaz was off, probably Arsenal were playing. And on his computer, there was a sticker, I was Merson's bookie, which perhaps something we shouldn't talk about, but it's true. The private phone would ring. Ian Botham would be on. That was private. Again, we probably shouldn't talk about that. It's another story. But I was a kid, really, and it was a fantastic place to work. Again, full of geniuses, very, very good punters. The spread betting people, really good punters. And I just did the horse racing there and loved it for probably 7 or 8 years. But I was going to the dogs. I mean, we talked about this before, work-life balance and all the rest of it. When I was like 23, 24, we lived in London, renting a flat in London, and 6 a.m. get into Sporting Index, price up the horse racing, trade that all day, 5:30 cab to Paddington, Paddington to Reading, cab to the dog track, bolt down dinner, price up the card, bet on 4 dog races, cab to the station, train home, cab back home to Islington. This is now 1 a.m. Get the racing post at King's Cross, start again at 6 o'clock the next day. I was doing that 6 days a week. I mean, you'd be dead by now. You know, it's absolute madness. Apart from being extremely unhealthy, you know, you're eating rubbish on the way and all the rest of it. But no, I mean, great times. And I met so many really nice people along the way.
Now, you said that you were fairly young, relatively young, when you joined the ranks of these miserable old bookmakers. What did their established bookies there think of this young upstart coming into the ring?
They absolutely hated me. I mean, I remember one of them having me by the throat, but that was because I was probably very arrogant. And I do remember Ken Campbell, who's probably, hopefully, he's still around, Touchwood. Absolutely, I grew to. It was a sort of love-hate relationship. You know, he hated me, but by the end, he probably quite. You know, we got on all right. He bet next to me for many years, and I think I upset the market when I started because they used to have a very closed club of old boys. They bet to 130%. There was a lot of punters. Everyone got paid in cash in those days. It was totally different. Reading still is a growing town. It was full of builders. It was thriving. Before you got to having a recession, everyone had plenty of money. Men got paid with pay packets. So, you know, they gave their wife £100 and they had £200 to crack on with. And it was, even when I joined, although they would say it had gone, you know, bookmakers always say it's gone, it hadn't gone. Relative to now, it was like a gold mine relative to what it is now. You could take money. I mean, don't get me wrong, people think bookmaking was a route to riches. It really wasn't. I know 2 bookmakers who went bust in very bad ways at Reading in the time I was there. One I did a bit of work for on the floor went bust one Reading Masters night back in the day, and that was a horrendous mess to sort out after that. And one other as well later on did, who I'm still friends with now. But bookmakers who fail don't get talked about, generally speaking, but it does happen a lot, you know.
And one of the reasons for that was you had people like Harry Findlay. Yeah,
well, Harry used to own a lot of greyhounds and was a very big punter. He got a lot bigger later on, you know, fantastically successful at one time. But I remember, as I say, I thought I was Jack the Lad, you know. I remember Harry coming in one Reading Master and he had a dog in trap 1. Now, this is going to be icy and all are going to hate this story because this is a horrible bookmaker bragging story, which I'm pained to tell you. But Harry Findlay, he had a dog in trap 1 who was obviously going to be, he paid a lot of money for it, I'm sure. I can't even remember its name, Alzheimer's is setting in, but there was a local dog in 2 who was a very fast breaking, tight railer from trap 1 most weeks, and he was in 2, and Harry Findlay's dog was in 1. And I think I must have taken sort of 15 or 16 grand out of it, evens, and wouldn't take it off because I was cocky and all the rest of it, which is a horrendous way to be. As it happened, obviously, I wouldn't be telling you, it did get beat, obviously. 2 went straight into it, out the traps, and that was it. But Harry then cracked away and had more bets, and yeah, I mean, he was a character. But I also, for 10 years, I bet with Terry Dartnell bet with me. He's now handed over to Matt, who's a very, very good trainer. And people always ask, how did you used to bet Terry Darton? You know, he's genius. He is a genius. But they thought it was crooked. It was never ever crooked. He didn't do it cheat at all, Terry Darton. He was just an exceptionally good dog trainer, and his son Matt he trains at Central Park and has open race dogs. They train just down the road actually. People thought it was crooked. It wasn't crooked at all. You just had to manage how much he'd get on certain dogs. So if there was a hot open race and he had a really good dog in it, I'd be willing to take it on. If he had a dog in an A9 off trials, then I don't want to stand it for 300 quid. You know, you had to pick your punches. I mean, one story I will tell quickly, Simon, is that Terry Darton had a pup called My Buddy or Me Buddy. This is years ago. It was about -6 on a Tuesday night at Reading, one of the early races, which would have been a puppy 3, which is the equivalent of an A9, the lowest of the low. And Terry Darton had this pup called Me Buddy. I'd actually seen its trials because I was I was very, very disciplined and good and put the time in then. And in its trials, it had cramped up. It's got loads of pace, but it cramped up. So the end time it was doing, which is what they used to put them on the card, was slow. So it was in this basement grade. So we're all stood outside. I was cagey about pricing it up. Anyway, the market formed. People came out of the woodwork. By the finish, this dog, everyone in the world was backing it. It ended up 5-2 on. And I didn't actually stand it. The last bet I laid was $2,000 at 5-2 on. I mean, it's already won, by the way. You know, this is not being clever. 8 weeks, it got beat. It got completely left in the traps and got beat. Again, bookmaker, horrible. Icy's going to hate this. It got beat. 8 weeks later, the dog won the Peterborough Derby, which is like one of the massive competitions. This isn't graded race. This is a top open race. It was the fastest pup in the country, and it won about 30 races after that. We got it beat in an A9 against Snails. You know, I mean, Darton. If you ever do a betting people with Darton, he'll remember it. It's the best story ever.
Okay, now just one more thing about the sort of clever punters. We will try and get Terry Darton. I'd be interested. How many of all the massive crowds that were there, how many punters do you think there would have been that would have worried you when you took a bet off them? There
were some very, very shrewd trainers, and most of them are still training now. Gordon and Richard Baker, absolutely lethal when they had a bet. A little trainer who used to be a pig farmer, Tim Holton, he used to train dogs called they all had the prefix Monterey. And if there was ever £100 for any of them, you'd need an act of God to get them beat, because it wasn't like greyhound racing now, which is basically a conveyor belt of constant action. There's, you know, while we're talking, there's probably 6 greyhound meetings on for the shops and for online. Dogs tended to get a run once a fortnight then, so they had 2 weeks to get them ready, and there were a lot of extremely clever people. But in those days, whereas those people are still around now, and their bets would show up immediately, and you'd do your absolute brains laying them at all, then there was enough general public money to ease the pain when they did have a touch. You'd be able to lay other dogs, for instance, rather than just the one. Whereas now, say you and I set up an online greyhound only bookmaking company, if you put up prices, you'd lay 4 dogs a meeting, and 3 of them would win, and they'd all crash. And when you got a race right, where you didn't make a rick, you wouldn't take £1. That's how tough it is, you know. Totally different now. Okay, we're going to wrap up the greyhound section with this part. So briefly, you got chucked out of Oxford for being a little bit too competitive, is that correct? I'll have to choose my words carefully here. I went to Oxford, Reading was about to shut, and Oxford recruited me. It was totally different times again. They wanted to boost the market and all the rest of it. And Oxford had bags meetings, which I'd never bet at before. I'd done 15 years at Reading or so, never bet at a bags meeting. And I had seen bags racing. I'd seen Tony Morris betting 4-1 the field at Wimbledon in the very early days of Betfair. It was 4-1, 4-1, 4-1, 4-1, 4-1, 4. They were all 4-1. On Betfair in the early days, something was 9-4. The bottom one was 5-2. That was 20. But Tony would bet 4, 4, 4. I thought, this could be quite handy at Oxford, you know, if you're allowed to ignore Betfair and put prices up. So perhaps the less said about Oxford, the better. But Oxford is reopening this Christmas, so that's one good thing about dog racing. And you put your name down? I haven't. I'm tempted, I must admit.